Good evening, Dungeon Masters. I'm Baron Durop. You've got questions, I've got answers. Welcome to Dungeon Support. Emery's McWright asks, what mechanics or scenarios best encourage players to get into role-playing heavy scenes with each other? The best thing to do here is to reward the kind of behavior you want to see at the table. Tell your players up front you will start awarding bonus XP to players who roleplay with each other, and then reward them for doing so, even for an awkward attempt. This will encourage them to do it more frequently. Keep in mind that not all players are thespians though, so some players will forgo the bonus XP just to avoid the limelight. To keep things fair, be sure you have other suitable awards for those players just so they don't fall behind. Alejandro Munez asks, what do you personally use to create maps? I tend to run my adventures as hex crawls, so I use Worldographer or HexFriend.net. Both are free and HexFriend runs in your browser. I'll link to both of them in the description. However, if I want to make a map I plan on giving to the players, I'll draw a separate map on an actual sheet of paper, crumple it up, soak it in hot tea for about an hour, dry it out, and burn the edges before I give the in-game artifact to the players during a session. I usually leave lots of stuff off the player-facing map too, so there's plenty of stuff for them to still discover. High Tech Wizard writes, are there any full mechanics or alternate resource pools worth adding to D&D? If there are mechanics worth adding, what are some examples? My answer to this question kind of comes with a hot take. I actually think 5th edition D&D is so tightly wound up around its core mechanics that doing any homebrewing which doesn't have cascading negative effects on the rest of the system is really hard to do. Homebrewing new spells, magic items, subclasses, and monsters is fine, but I generally avoid tinkering with 5e's fundamentals. Something I've seen Chamomile Has Adventures do, a former sponsor of this channel, is to use hit dice as a spendable pool for rechargeable abilities, instead of just healing during a short rest, so maybe I'd explore that as a possible resource. Imanol Vasquez writes, how can a dungeon environment itself be an element of storytelling or showing the rival faction's motivations? It's important to keep in mind that if there are two factions trying to inhabit the same dungeon, they will likely come into physical conflict. Therefore, the easy solution is to show evidence of that conflict having happened recently. For example, if a band of orcs are hiding out in an old temple that's infested with giant spiders, put 1 or 2 orc corpses wrapped up in silk on the spider side of the dungeon and venomous spider fangs on an alchemy table used by one of the more intelligent orcs on the other end. Then put barricades between the two sections of the dungeon as if the orcs were trying to block off the spiders. Imagining tit-for-tat scenarios like these are really all you need. Guillermo Chanelli writes, what are questions you would ask your players about their characters to help them build their character personalities and goals? I find that players will have their goals automatically evolve at the table. However, asking the players at character creation one thing that troubles them from their character's past usually leads to a goldmine of exploitable campaign story beats. Once you have that character backstory foundation, and a situation comes up related to the character's backstory, it's important to then ask how the character reacts or feels about it. People grow when they overcome adversity, so pushing a player to think through that growth as a live fire exercise is the most organic way to develop a character's personalities and goals. The Forgotten Death asks, what would you say is the ideal starting level for a campaign of new players? I want to make some beginning encounters with a slight challenge without risking them getting TPK'd by a sneeze. Your players will have quite a lot to think about when they start their first session, and their character sheet will be a lot to process. Therefore, first level characters are best so they don't get overwhelmed with too many options. With that said, when a character falls into death saves and things start looking grim, pivot the direction of your combat encounter. Enemy goblins or bandits can grab a death-saving PC, stabilize them, and demand ransom for the return of the unconscious character. Thanks to those death saves, it's actually quite hard for dungeon masters to rack up any TPKs without putting in serious effort, even at first level. Randomizer says, I've been having a few rough sessions with my party trying to solve some Myst-style puzzles. How do we signpost when the party has the solution in their inventory and they just need to use it, or when they haven't found the puzzle piece yet and they need to keep looking? If a character has the one and only solution on their person, just tell them. If a carved gemstone is supposed to fit into a slot, just tell them that it looks like it might fit. Likewise, if they don't have the latchkey to solve some puzzle, just describe any obvious properties of the object they need, and then use those same vocabulary words when the players eventually find the right object as you describe it. Telling players a slot looks like it fits a 2-inch wide hexagonal prism, and then describing another found object later as a large handle with a 2-inch wide hexagonal prism on its tip, makes everything clearly signposted. The players will feel smart for having picked up the item, and that's enough positive feedback to keep them engaged in the puzzle. Alabastine S asks, are there any good one-shots for starter DMs? What's a good campaign or module to run? It's nerve-wracking contemplating how to go about running your first campaign or session. This is something I've lamented about the starter sets as well. They can be overwhelming to brand new Dungeon Masters, and they don't really walk a new Dungeon Master through how or why the module is having them do specific things. Alternatively, a quick one-shot, which can be run in about an hour right after your players make characters, is called A Most Potent Brew by Wingham Press. It's a very simple dungeon crawl that starts the players in a brewery and sends them to the basement to handle a rat and spider infestation. It will get the players used to combat mechanics, dungeon crawling, and solving puzzles. And the environmental storytelling in the module is top-notch. A good follow-up to this is the basic D&D adventure Tomb of the Serpent Kings by Skirples on DriveThruRPG, and its 5th edition conversion by Quality Roleplaying. It's a dungeon crawl great for 1st or 2nd level characters, but also explains to the Dungeon Master what each encounter can teach the DM about level design. Be sure to download both the original and the 5e conversion so you get both the lessons as well as the 5e stat blocks. I'll add links to this stuff in the description below. Rods asks, what are some new campaign themes you'd recommend besides classic European high fantasy? 5th edition D&D is really good at telling stories of combat-focused, epic high fantasy, and not much else. In fact, I believe what we've grown accustomed to as European Fantasyland, which ironically doesn't resemble feudal Europe at all, is a shoehorned fit for D&D. Stories of mythology in settings like the mystic odysseys of Theros work much better since characters become as powerful as Jason and the Argonauts or Hercules by the time they reach 10th level. Therefore, drawing from ancient Egyptian, Norse, Babylonian, Chinese, or any other ancient civilization's mythology all works great with the 5th edition rule set. If you want something outside of those, I recommend trying a different RPG that will better reflect the theme you're after. Mark Miller's Traveler is great for Mass Effect feeling games, while Shadowdark by Arcane Library or Dungeon Crawl Classics by Goodman Games is great if you want a Darkest Dungeon vibe. So what do you think? Are there questions you'd like me to answer on future dungeon support videos? If so, leave your question in the comments below. If you'd like to help me make more content like this in the future, please consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching, Dungeon Masters, and until next time, good night.